Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover how to program and periodize strength and conditioning training for basketball athletes. Let's first establish what qualities can be beneficial for basketball athletes. The first training method that can be beneficial for basketball players is unloaded sprint training. This refers to training with the goal of improving how fast an athlete can run in a straight line. Unloaded sprint training can be beneficial for basketball athletes since they ultimately play a running-based sport. By being able to run faster in an absolute sense, it will generally improve all other speed-related qualities, such as change of direction performance and repeated sprint ability. Basketball athletes don't need to train for maximal velocity sprinting, as they will never be reaching top speeds during a match. Therefore, only shorter distances up to around 30 meters are necessary. The next training method that can be beneficial for basketball players is resisted sprint training. This refers to sprint training using external resistance as a method to enhance acceleration performance. Resisted sprint training can be beneficial for basketball athletes to enhance unloaded sprint performance. In particular, resisted sprints will have the most transfer to acceleration performance over short distances. Since basketball players are constantly required to accelerate in different directions, enhancing acceleration ability is essential for physical performance in basketball. The next training method that can be beneficial for basketball players is change of direction ability. This refers to the ability to rapidly decelerate and then re-accelerate in a different direction. Change of direction training can be beneficial for basketball players due to its extremely high prevalence in the sport. If an athlete can change direction faster, they can potentially have more time to shoot, pass, or dribble past an opponent. However, basketball players perform hundreds of changes of direction during sport practice and competitive matches at high intensities. Therefore, it is probably unnecessary to perform extra change of direction work during strength and conditioning sessions. The next training method that can be beneficial for basketball players is plyometric training. This refers to exercises which have a high reliance on the stretch shortening cycle. Plyometric training can enhance the efficiency of the stretch shortening cycle, allowing athletes to more effectively use the elastic properties of the tendons. This can benefit basketball players by improving performance in movements with fast ground contact times, such as running at fast speeds and jumping from a running start. The next training method that can be beneficial for basketball athletes is power training. Power training refers to moving external loads using ballistic exercises. This has the goal of improving how much force is able to be produced in short periods of time. This can enhance athletic movements such as acceleration, change of direction, and standing vertical jump, all of which are movements seen in a basketball match. The next training method that can be beneficial for basketball players is maximal strength. Maximal strength refers to training to improve maximum force output. Improving maximal force output raises the ceiling of force production. This means that even when submaximal forces are required, the relative amount of force that the athlete exerts will still be increased. This can benefit all athletic qualities for a basketball athlete. The next training method that can be beneficial for basketball players is general strength training. General strength training refers to full body resistance training using moderate rep ranges and loads. General strength training has two primary benefits for athletes. The first is to induce muscle growth. This allows more tissue to contribute to force production. The second benefit is for injury prevention purposes. It is well established that athletes who perform consistent strength training have a much lower injury risk than those who don't. And the last training method that can benefit basketball players is endurance training. Endurance training refers to the ability to repeat performance specifically for the sport. For basketball athletes, this refers to performing repeated short durations of high-intensity sprints, jumps, and changes of direction with limited recovery time. Similar to change of direction training, basketball athletes already get an endurance training stimulus from sport practice and competitive matches. Therefore, it is probably not necessary to perform additional endurance training during strength and conditioning sessions. So for our strength and conditioning sessions, we'll include unloaded sprints, resisted sprints, plyometric training, power training, maximal strength, and general strength, while change of direction and endurance training will be left for basketball practice sessions. Now that we know which qualities will be trained in strength and conditioning sessions, we can now explore how to plan the week of training for basketball athletes. First, we need to establish how many times per week the athlete will perform strength and conditioning sessions. This will need to work around sport practice sessions and competitive fixtures. Let's say, for an example, this basketball team has practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Sundays, the team has their weekly competitive game during the season, and during the preseason, this is replaced with an extra practice session. With this schedule in place, let's say this athlete has decided to perform 2 strength and conditioning sessions, which will be on Wednesdays and Fridays. In both of these strength and conditioning sessions, we will perform all of the qualities that we decided will be included. However, the qualities will be undulated between days to provide a slight variation for each session. The qualities will be undulated by using less taxing variations on Friday, since this is closer to the competitive match on Sunday, and we don't want the athletes to be fatigued going into the game. Unloaded sprints will be slightly longer in distances on Wednesday for a speed emphasis, while Friday will use shorter distances for more of an acceleration emphasis. Wednesday will use lighter loads for resisted sprint training, again for a speed emphasis, while Friday will use heavier loads for an acceleration emphasis. Plyometric training will involve exercises with shorter contact times on Wednesday and longer contact times on Friday. This pairs up well with the sprint training, allowing similar qualities to be trained in each session. Power training will use lighter loads with faster velocities on Wednesday and heavier loads with slower velocities on Friday. And lastly, maximal strength and general strength will be undulated by using higher rep ranges with lighter loads on Wednesday and heavier loads with lower rep ranges on Friday. Now that we have a general weekly structure in place, we can create a mesocycle of training. Let's now establish what the general structure of the mesocycle will look like. So let's use a 5-week mesocycle length, including 4 overloading weeks of training and 1 deload. So the first week of each mesocycle will be lower in volume to allow the athlete to recover from the previous mesocycle of training. Let's now create some example mesocycles for different times in the basketball season. First, let's explore how a mesocycle may look in an early preparation period of training. An early preparation period refers to times when the athlete doesn't need to be in peak condition. This is where the athlete will build foundational qualities to potentiate subsequent training later in the year. A mesocycle of strength and conditioning training in an early preparation period may look something like this. As we can see here, the unloaded sprint training uses shorter distances to limit sprint speed, with a slight difference in distances between sessions. This is to build a foundation of acceleration ability, since the athletes likely haven't been exposed to the stress of high-speed sprinting for a while, since we are in an early preparation period. For resisted sprint training, sled pulls have been implemented as an exercise. Wednesday's session uses a moderate load, while Friday uses a heavy load. Heavier loads are implemented at this point in time to emphasize force production. For plyometric training, the depth jump has been selected as it naturally has longer ground contact times. This means that higher forces will be produced, which can potentiate plyometrics with short contact times in subsequent mesocycles. Wednesday's session uses unloaded depth jumps, while Friday's session uses an additional load of 5 kilos in the form of a weight vest. For power training, the squat jump has been implemented as an exercise. Wednesday's session uses a moderate load, while Friday's session uses a heavy load. Heavier loads are used in the early preparation period to emphasize force production, which should potentiate subsequent power training. For maximal strength training, the trap bar deadlift has been implemented. Wednesday's session uses a rep range of 6 to 10, while Friday's session uses a rep range of 4 to 8. The rep ranges are slightly higher in the early preparation period to emphasize structural adaptations, which will enhance the ability to lift heavier loads in subsequent mesocycles. For general strength training, 3 exercises have been chosen: the dumbbell bench press, the stiff leg deadlift, and the seated cable row. These exercises are performed in the 8 to 12 rep range on Wednesday and the 6 to 10 rep range on Friday to provide some variation from session to session. Let's now explore how a mesocycle may look somewhere during the mid-preparation period for a basketball athlete. The mid-preparation period is a time when the athlete is closer to when they need to be in peak condition, but not quite at their peak just yet. Slightly more specific training methods should be used at this point in time to have the athlete in better physical condition. A mesocycle of training at this point of the training period may look something like this. As we can see, the unloaded sprints have increased slightly in distances from the previous mesocycle up to a distance of 20 meters. This will allow the athlete to reach faster running speeds. Resisted sprint training also increases in distances slightly from the previous mesocycle. The loads used have also been decreased to a light to moderate load. Both of these factors will allow slightly faster running speeds. Plyometric training uses hurdle jumps in this mesocycle as they will have shorter ground contact times. This will mean the athlete must produce force in a shorter time frame, and the stretch shortening cycle will play a greater role. This still undulates by using a 5 kilo weight vest on Friday's training session. Power training still uses the squat jump, although the loads have decreased to light to moderate loads. This will allow faster movement velocity and higher jump height, meaning that force must be produced in short time frames. For maximal strength, the trap bar deadlift now uses a lower rep range, allowing heavier loads to be lifted, and the general strength exercises remain the same, as these don't necessarily need to be periodized over time. This is because we always want to use a moderate rep range with moderate loads. And finally, let's have a look at how a mesocycle may look during a peaking period. A peaking period is when the athlete aims to be in absolute peak physical condition. This means that the most specific training methods should be used to have the highest transfer to athletic performance. A peaking mesocycle may look something like this. Unloaded sprint training uses longer distances once again to allow even faster running speeds. At this point, the athlete should be reaching faster speeds than they ever will during a basketball match, and should be fully prepared to sprint in competitive matches with a low injury risk. Resisted sprint training uses lighter loads once again, and the distances also increase. This allows faster running speeds and should have the highest transfer to sprint performance. Plyometric training uses pogo hops as an exercise in this mesocycle, which will naturally have very short ground contact times. This requires a high involvement of the stretch shortening cycle and for force to be produced in very short time frames. Power training uses the squat jump with light loads. This emphasizes the velocity side of power production, meaning that the athlete must produce force in shorter times. The trap bar deadlift remains in place as a maximal strength exercise, although the rep ranges have been reduced once again. This will allow the heaviest loads to be lifted, and therefore the highest forces to be produced. And lastly, the general strength exercises remain the same as the previous two mesocycles, as they don't need to be periodized. Now that we've explored how to create a mesocycle for different periods of the year, let's now establish how this can be structured throughout the year to form an annual plan. The first piece of information we need is the competition schedule, or the dates of the competitive season. As we can see here, the competitive fixtures have been inputted by using yellow boxes. The light yellow boxes indicate pre-season friendly matches, the regular yellow boxes indicate in-season competitive matches, and the dark yellow boxes are the finals games. Now that we know when the season is, we can split the year up into the pre-season, in-season, and off-season periods. As we can see here, the 15-week pre-season runs from April to August, the season runs from around August to the beginning of March, and the players are given a 7-week off-season after the end of the competitive season. We can now split each of the seasons into training blocks or mesocycles to make it easier to program training. So we can see here that the pre-season consists of 3 5-week mesocycles, the in-season consists of 6 5-week mesocycles, and there is no planned training for the off-season period. Now we can roughly plan how each training quality will be emphasized during each block of training. As we can see here, the qualities are periodized by using the most specific emphasis when the athletes need to be in better physical condition, and a less specific emphasis when the athletes don't need to be at their peak. During the early preseason, more general training methods are used to potentiate subsequent mesocycles. As the in-season approaches, more specific methods are used because the athletes need to be in better condition. Then at around the midway point of the season, a short block of more general training is implemented once again to ensure the athletes don't lose their baseline physical qualities. From there, highly specific methods are used to peak the athlete for the end of the season where they potentially have finals. And finally, we can implement a peaking index. A peaking index is a rough guide as to when we expect the athletes to be in what condition at what time of the year. As we can see here, a number system has been implemented where a lower number indicates a better condition and a higher number indicates a worse condition. For this plan, we aim to have the athletes in the best condition possible for the end of the season. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.